The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Windsor Castle as Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood before the ornate mirror in her private chambers. Her reflection showed a woman who had grown into her role with grace and dignity, yet today something was different. The usual sparkle in her hazel eyes seemed dimmed. Replaced by an uncertainty that she couldn't quite shake, William paced restlessly in the adjoining room, his footsteps echoing against the ancient stone walls. The weight of the decision they had made together pressed heavily on his shoulders. As the future King of England, he had always known that duty would demand sacrifices. But nothing had prepared him for this moment. The irony wasn't lost on him that in a castle filled with centuries of royal history, he was about to make history of his own in the most unexpected way. The couple had spent months discussing this decision in hushed tones, away from the prying eyes of the media and the well-meaning advice of palace officials. It had started as a whispered conversation during one of their evening walks through the private gardens of Kensington Palace. Catherine had been the first to voice what they had both been thinking, her words cutting through the crisp autumn air like a blade. "What if we chose differently?" she had asked, her breath visible in the cool evening air. "What if we put our family first, just this once?" William had stopped walking then, turning to face his wife with an expression that mixed surprise with something that looked suspiciously like relief. They had been married for over a decade, had weathered countless storms together, had learned to communicate in the subtle language that long-married couples develop. But this conversation was different. This was about breaking away from expectations that had been set in stone long before either of them had been born. The decision hadn't come easily. There had been sleepless nights, long conversations that stretched into the early hours of the morning, in moments of doubt that threatened to overwhelm them both. Catherine found herself thinking about her children more than usual, wondering what kind of future they were creating for George, Charlotte, and Louis. Would they understand? Would the public forgive them? William's struggle was different, but equally intense. The crown had been his destiny since birth, a path laid out with precision and ceremony. Every decision in his life had been made with this future in mind. His education, his military service, his choice of wife. Even the timing of his children's births had all been carefully orchestrated to serve the monarchy. But now, faced with a choice that could change everything, he found himself questioning not just his duty, but his desires. The palace had been unusually quiet in recent weeks. Staff members moved through the corridors with a sense of anticipation, though none of them knew exactly what was coming. There had been whispered conversations between senior advisors, hastily arranged meetings with constitutional experts, in a general air of something significant brewing beneath the surface of royal routine. Catherine's mother, Carol Middleton, had visited more frequently than usual, her maternal instincts picking up on the tension that her daughter tried so hard to hide. During one particular visit, as they sat in Catherine's private sitting room overlooking the gardens, Carol had reached across to squeeze her daughter's hand. "You know, darling," she had said softly, "sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose the path that feels right in your heart, even if it's not the path everyone expects you to take." Those words had resonated with Catherine more than any advice from constitutional lawyers or palace officials ever could. She had married into the royal family knowing full well what it would mean for her life, her freedom, and her children's futures. But she had also married for love, and that love had grown stronger with each passing year. The media had begun to notice subtle changes in the couple's public appearances. Royal watchers, those eagle-eyed observers who made careers out of analyzing every gesture and expression, had started commenting on a certain distance in their demeanor, not between William and Catherine themselves, but between them and the institution they represented. At a recent state dinner, photographers had captured a moment between the couple that would later be analyzed frame by frame. William had leaned in to whisper something to Catherine. For just a moment, the carefully maintained royal masks had slipped. The look that passed between them was one of such intimacy and understanding that it seemed to exclude everyone else in the room, including the dignitaries and officials who surrounded them. The children had sensed the change too, though they were too young to understand its full implications. George, as the eldest, had asked his father why there were so many serious conversations happening in hushed tones. William had struggled to find an age-appropriate answer, finally settling on a promise that everything would be explained when the time was right. Charlotte, always perceptive, had simply hugged her mother a little tighter during their bedtime routine, as if sensing that something important was shifting in their world. Louis, still young enough to be largely oblivious to the adult concerns swirling around him, continued to approach each day with the boundless energy and joy that only a child could possess. The decision, when it finally crystallized, came during a family weekend at Sandringham. Away from the formal constraints of official residences and the constant presence of staff, William and Catherine had found themselves truly alone with their thoughts for the first time in months. They had walked the same paths that generations of royals had walked before them, but instead of feeling connected to that history, they felt increasingly separate from it. It was Catherine who spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper as they stood looking out over the Norfolk countryside. "I can't do this anymore, William. Not the way things are now. Not if it means sacrificing everything else that matters." William's response had been immediate and decisive. "Then we won't. We'll find another way. There has to be another way." That conversation, brief as it was, had set in motion a chain of events that would culminate in this moment. With Catherine standing before her mirror and William pacing in the next room, both of them preparing to make an announcement that would change not just their lives, but the course of the monarchy itself. The first person William had to tell was his father. The conversation with King Charles had been scheduled as a routine update on royal duties, but both men knew it would be anything but routine. They met in Charles's private study at Clarence House, a room filled with family photographs and personal mementos that seemed to mock the formal nature of their discussion. Charles had listened in silence as his eldest son laid out the decision he and Catherine had reached. The king's face had gone through a range of emotions: surprise, disappointment, anger, and finally, a resignation that spoke to his understanding of the impossible pressures his son faced. When William finished speaking, the silence stretched between them like a chasm. "Oh, now you understand what this means," Charles had finally said, his voice heavy with the weight of centuries of tradition. "Not just for you, but for George. For the future of everything we've built." William had nodded, his jaw set with determination. "I understand, Father. But I also understand what it would mean if we stayed on this path. Catherine is breaking under the pressure. The children are starting to notice. And I'm watching the woman I love disappear a little more each day." The king had stood then, walking to the window that looked out onto the London street beyond. For a moment, he wasn't the monarch, but simply a father watching his son make an impossible choice. "I never wanted this burden for you," he had admitted quietly, "but I also never imagined you would have the courage to reject it." Meanwhile, Catherine was having her own difficult conversation with the queen consort. Camilla had always been kind to Catherine, understanding perhaps better than anyone the challenges of marrying into the royal family later in life. They sat in Camilla's private sitting room, tea growing cold between them as Catherine explained the decision that had been tearing her apart for months.
Oh.
"The children barely know who I am anymore," Catherine had confessed, her voice breaking slightly. "I'm so busy being the Princess of Wales that I've forgotten how to be their mother. George asked me last week if I would still live with them when he becomes king. A 9-year-old shouldn't have to worry about losing his mother to duty." Camilla had reached across to take Catherine's hands, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. "I remember feeling lost in all of this too. The difference is I chose it later in life when my children were already grown. You've given your entire young adulthood to the crown. No one could blame you for wanting some of it back." The palace machinery had begun to grind into motion once the decision was made. Constitutional experts were consulted in absolute secrecy. Precedents were researched, and the legal implications were carefully mapped out. The situation was unprecedented in modern times, requiring delicate navigation of laws and traditions that had never been tested in quite this way. Sir Clive Alderton, the king's private secretary, had worked around the clock to manage the logistics of what was essentially a constitutional crisis wrapped in a personal tragedy. The man who had spent decades serving the monarchy now found himself helping to orchestrate its most significant change in generations. He moved through the palace halls like a man carrying the weight of history on his shoulders. The media had begun to sense that something significant was brewing. Royal correspondents, those seasoned journalists who had made careers out of reading the subtlest signs from palace activities, started reporting on unusual movements behind the scenes. Private cars arriving at odd hours, meetings that weren't on official schedules, and a general air of tension that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the royal residences. William and Catherine had made the decision to tell their children. Before making any public announcement, the conversation had taken place in the familiar comfort of their Kensington Palace apartment, the same rooms where they had shared countless family dinners and bedtime stories. George, Charlotte, and Louis had listened with the serious attention that children give to important, adult conversations they don't fully understand. "Mummy and Daddy love you very much," Catherine had begun, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. "And everything we're doing is because we want to make sure we can be the best parents we can be for you." George, always the most thoughtful of the three, had asked the question they had been dreading. "Does this mean I won't be king someday?" William had knelt down to his son's level, looking directly into eyes that were so much like his own. "It means you'll have choices, George. Choices that your daddy didn't have. And whatever you choose, we'll be proud of you." The reaction from extended family members had been mixed. Some understood and supported the decision, recognizing the toll that royal life had taken on the young family. Others were horrified at what they saw as an abandonment of duty and tradition. Princess Anne had been particularly vocal in her disapproval, while Prince Edward had surprised everyone by expressing quiet support for his nephew's choice. Harry, despite the ongoing tensions within the family, had been one of the first to offer his support when he learned of the decision. His own experience of walking away from royal duties gave him a unique understanding of what William and Catherine were facing. "I just want them to be happy," he had told a close friend. "I know what it costs to stay, and I know what it costs to leave. At least now they're choosing together." The Archbishop of Canterbury had been consulted about the religious implications of the decision. As the supreme governor of the Church of England, any choice William made regarding his future role had significant theological ramifications. The Archbishop, a man of deep faith and practical wisdom, had spent long hours in prayer and consultation before offering his perspective. "The crown is a calling," he had told William during their private meeting, "but so is fatherhood. So is marriage. Sometimes these callings conflict, and when they do, a man must follow his conscience and his faith. I cannot tell you which path is right, but I can tell you that whatever you choose, it must be chosen with integrity and love." The financial implications were staggering. Lawyers worked to disentangle centuries of legal precedent regarding royal property, titles, and financial arrangements. The couple had made it clear that they wanted to be financially independent. But the complexities of royal wealth made it far more complicated than simply closing a bank account. Catherine had spent hours walking through the rooms of Kensington Palace, memorizing details she had taken for granted for so many years. The way the light fell through the windows in the morning, the sound of her children's laughter echoing through the corridors, the quiet moments she had shared with William in the privacy of their home. She knew that whatever came next, this chapter of their lives was ending. The staff at all the royal residences had begun to sense the gravity of what was coming. These were people who had dedicated their lives to serving the royal family, and the thought of such a fundamental change filled many of them with uncertainty and sadness. Mrs. Pemberton, the children's nanny, had been particularly affected, knowing that her role in the children's lives was about to change dramatically. As the date for their announcement approached, William and Catherine found themselves clinging to small moments of normalcy. Family dinners where they could pretend just for an hour that they were any other family. Bedtime routines that felt precious in their ordinariness. Quiet conversations in the evening where they reminded each other why they had made this choice and found strength in their shared commitment to a different kind of future. The morning of the announcement dawned gray and overcast, as if the weather itself reflected the somber mood that had settled over the royal household. Catherine woke early, unable to sleep past 5 in the morning, found herself drawn to the window overlooking the palace gardens. The familiar view that had comforted her for years now seemed to be saying goodbye. William was already awake, sitting in the chair by the window with a cup of tea growing cold in his hands. They had both been restless all night, the weight of what they were about to do pressing down on them like a physical force. The speech had been written and rewritten dozens of times, each draft trying to capture the complexity of their emotions and the necessity of their choice. The children had sensed the unusual atmosphere in the house. Charlotte had climbed into bed with her parents earlier than usual, snuggling between them with the intuitive understanding that comfort was needed, even if she didn't fully grasp why. Louis had been unusually quiet at breakfast, picking at his favorite cereal while watching his parents with wide, observant eyes. George, bearing the weight of his position, even at his young age, had asked his father directly, "Are people going to be angry with us?" William had paused in buttering his son's toast, struck by the maturity of the question and the pain it revealed. His eldest child was already learning to think of public reaction before his own feelings, a burden that William recognized all too well. "Some people might not understand at first," William had answered carefully, "but the people who love us will support us, and that's what matters most." The palace press office had been in controlled chaos for days. Seasoned communications professionals who had handled countless royal crises found themselves facing something entirely unprecedented. How do you announce that the future king and queen are stepping back from roles that have defined them since birth? The traditional language of royal communications seemed inadequate for such a personal and revolutionary decision. Sir Simon Case, the cabinet secretary, had been briefed on the constitutional implications. Government lawyers had worked through the night to understand how William's decision would affect the line of succession and what legal mechanisms would need to be activated. The Prime Minister had been informed in a private meeting that left both men visibly shaken by the magnitude of the change. The international implications were equally significant. William and Catherine had become global symbols of modern monarchy, their every move watched and analyzed by royal watchers around the world. Their decision would send ripples through other constitutional monarchies and raise questions about the future of the institution itself. Catherine's family had rallied around her with the fierce loyalty that had always characterized the Middletons. Carol and Michael had arrived at Kensington Palace the night before, not with advice or judgment, but simply with their presence. They understood that their daughter was making the hardest choice of her life, and their role was to support her through it. Pippa had been devastated when Catherine first told her about the decision, not because she disagreed with it, but because she understood the pain her sister must be feeling. "You've given everything to that role," she had said during a tearful phone conversation. "If walking away is what you need to do to save yourself and your family, then we'll all walk away with you." The Archbishop had spent the morning in prayer, knowing that he would soon be asked to comment on a decision that challenged fundamental assumptions about duty, service, and the nature of calling. He had seen the toll that royal life had taken on Catherine, had watched a vibrant young woman slowly dim under the weight of expectations that would have crushed many people entirely. William had made one final visit to his grandmother's grave before the announcement. Standing in the quiet of the royal burial ground, he had spoken to her memory about the choice he was making. He had always believed that Queen Elizabeth would have understood, that her famous pragmatism would have recognized the necessity of his decision. Even if it broke with everything she had represented, the staff at Kensington Palace had been quietly saying their own goodbyes. Many of them had worked for the couple since their early married days, had watched the children grow up, and had become extended family in their own way. The thought of this chapter ending filled them with a grief that was both professional and deeply personal. Mrs. Williams, the housekeeper who had managed their household for nearly a decade, had been found crying quietly in the linen closet by one of the younger staff members. She had dedicated her life to creating a home for the royal family, and the thought of that home being dismantled was almost more than she could bear. The security arrangements for their new life had been a logistical nightmare. The couple would always need protection, but the nature of that protection would change dramatically. New protocols had to be developed, new procedures put in place, all while maintaining absolute secrecy about their plans. The children's schools had been discreetly informed about the upcoming changes, Headmasters and teachers who had grown accustomed to having royal pupils would need to adapt to a new reality where George, Charlotte, and Louis would need different kinds of protection and consideration. Catherine had spent her last morning as Princess of Wales visiting the organizations she had championed for years. The early childhood development programs, the mental health initiatives, the art projects that had brought her so much joy and purpose. She had said goodbye to the staff and volunteers who had become her partners in work she was genuinely passionate about at each stop. She had struggled to maintain her composure. These weren't just professional relationships ending, connections to work that had given her life meaning beyond the ceremonial aspects of royal duty. The thought of leaving these projects behind was one of the most painful aspects of their decision. William had made similar farewell visits, including a private meeting with military personnel who had served with him and under his patronage. These men and women had seen him not as a royal, but as a fellow service member, and their respect and understanding meant everything to him as he prepared to leave that identity behind. The final preparations for the announcement took place in a conference room that felt more like a war room. Lawyers, communications, specialists, and senior palace officials worked through every detail of how the news would be released, what questions might be asked, and how to manage the inevitable media storm that would follow. The couple had decided to make their announcement via a pre-recorded video. Filmed in the same room at Kensington Palace, where they had conducted their engagement interview years earlier, the symbolism was intentional. They had begun their royal journey together in that space, and they would end it there as well. As the cameras were being set up, Catherine found herself remembering that earlier interview. How nervous and excited they had been. How full of hope for the future. The young woman who had sat in that chair, proudly showing off her engagement ring, could never have imagined the path that had led to this moment. The makeup artist worked quietly, trying to hide the evidence of sleepless nights and emotional strain, but there were some things that couldn't be concealed. The sadness in Catherine's eyes, the tension in William's shoulders, the way they held hands just a little tighter than usual. Their final moments before recording were spent alone together, sharing a silence that contained years of love, struggle, and shared decision-making. They had weathered scandals, family tensions, and the relentless pressure of public life. But this moment, paradoxically, felt both like an ending and a beginning. The red recording light blinked on at precisely 3 o'clock in the afternoon. William and Catherine sat side by side on the familiar blue sofa, their hands clasped together in a grip that spoke of mutual support and shared resolve. The room was silent, except for the quiet hum of camera equipment and the barely audible breathing of the minimal crew that had been sworn to secrecy. Catherine spoke first, her voice steady but carrying an undertone of emotion that made every word feel weighted with significance. After much thought and careful consideration, William and I have made the difficult decision to step back from our roles as senior working members of the royal family. The words hung in the air like a confession, each syllable carrying the weight of tradition being broken and expectations being shattered. William continued, his own voice reflecting years of internal struggle finally finding voice. This decision has not been made lightly. We have spent months discussing what is best for our family, our children, and our ability to serve in a way that feels authentic and sustainable. The camera captured every nuance of their expressions, the slight tremor in Catherine's lower lip, the way William's jaw tightened when he spoke about their children, the manner in which they seemed to draw strength from each other's presence. These were not the polished, practiced expressions of seasoned royals, but the raw emotions of two people making the hardest choice of their lives. We have loved serving the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth. Catherine continued, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. The causes we have championed, the people we have met, the communities we have been privileged to support, these experiences have shaped us and will remain with us always. But we have come to understand that we can no longer serve effectively while trying to balance the impossible demands of royal duty with our responsibilities as parents and partners. The speech had been crafted to explain without justifying, to acknowledge the magnitude of their decision without defensiveness. They spoke about their gratitude for the support they had received, their deep respect for the institution of monarchy, and their hope that people would understand their need to put their family first. William's voice cracked slightly as he addressed the impact on his children. George, Charlotte, and Louis deserve parents who are present, who can guide them through childhood without the constant weight of royal protocol overwhelming family life. We want to give them the chance to grow up with choices we never had. The recording session lasted 45 minutes, with multiple takes needed to capture the perfect balance of emotion and composure. Each time they stumbled over words or became too emotional to continue, they would pause, take a breath, and begin again. The crew worked in respectful silence, understanding that they were witnessing history being made. When the cameras finally stopped rolling, the couple sat in stunned silence for several minutes. The words they had rehearsed in private, the decision they had agonized over for months, had finally been given voice. There was no taking it back now. The wheels of change had been set irrevocably in motion. The Palace Communications team immediately began the careful orchestration of the announcement's release. The video would be uploaded to official channels at precisely 6 o'clock that evening, aimed to catch the early evening news cycles, both in the UK and internationally. Statements had been prepared for various officials. Protocols had been established for managing the immediate aftermath. King Charles was informed the moment the recording was complete. He had spent the afternoon in his private study, able to concentrate on any of his usual duties, while knowing that his son and daughter-in-law were making their final public statement as senior royals. When the call came, he simply nodded to his private secretary and asked to be left alone. The children were at school during the recording. A deliberate choice to maintain some normalcy in their day, even as their parents' world was shifting around them. Arrangements had been made for them to be collected early before the news broke publicly, so that they could be safely at home when the inevitable media storm began. Prince Harry called from California. Within minutes of being notified about the recording, the conversation with his brother was brief but emotional, with Harry offering his full support and understanding. "I know what it takes to make this choice," he had said simply. "I'm proud of you both for putting your family first." The Prime Minister was briefed in a secure conference room at Downing Street, surrounded by constitutional lawyers and senior civil servants. The implications of William's decision rippled through multiple government departments, affecting everything from security arrangements to diplomatic protocols. A statement had been prepared, expressing the government's respect for the couple's decision, while affirming the stability of constitutional arrangements. At precisely 6 o'clock, the video was released simultaneously across all official royal social media channels, the palace website, and 2 major news organizations worldwide. Within minutes, it had been viewed millions of times, shared across every platform, and analyzed by royal correspondents who struggled to find historical precedents for such an announcement. The immediate reaction was seismic. News anchors struggled to find appropriate language for a development that seemed to defy categorization. Was this an abdication? A resignation? A family crisis? Or a constitutional revolution? The lack of precedent left commentators grasping for context and comparison. Social media exploded with reactions ranging from heartbroken support to angry condemnation. Hashtag Support William and Kate began trending within an hour, filled with messages from people who understood the impossible pressures they had faced. Simultaneously, hashtag Royal Duty trended with posts expressing disappointment and arguing that service to the nation should come before personal considerations. The reaction in the palace was immediate and intense. Staff members who had dedicated their careers to supporting the couple now faced an uncertain future. Some would transfer to other royal households. Others would follow William and Catherine in whatever capacity they could, and many would need to find entirely new employment. International reaction was swift and varied. Commonwealth nations issued carefully worded statements, expressing respect for the couple's decision while affirming their continued loyalty to the crown. European royal families, many dealing with their own modernization challenges, watched with intense interest to see how the British public would respond. The children arrived home to find their familiar world fundamentally changed. News vans lined the streets outside Kensington Palace. Photographers with enormous lenses waited behind barriers, and the usual calm of their neighborhood had been replaced with the controlled chaos of a major news story breaking. George, old enough to understand that something significant was happening, asked his parents directly about the cameras and crowds. William knelt down to his son's level and explained, as simply as possible, that they had told the world about their decision to live differently. "Are we in trouble?" George asked with the direct honesty of childhood. "No," Catherine replied firmly. "We're choosing to be a family first, and everything else second." That evening, as the initial wave of news coverage washed over the country, the family ate dinner together in their private dining room. For the first time in months, there were no official engagements to prepare for, no briefings to review, no public appearances demanding their attention the next day. The silence felt both liberating and terrifying. The children went to bed at their usual time, though the excitement outside made normal bedtime routines challenging. Charlotte asked if the people with cameras would still be there in the morning, and Catherine honestly replied that they probably would be, but that it would get better with time, as the house settled into quiet. William and Catherine found themselves sitting together in their living room, watching news coverage of their own announcement with a mixture of fascination and disbelief. They had crossed a bridge that could never be uncrossed. And while they felt certain about their decision, the magnitude of the change was overwhelming. The morning after the announcement brought no relief from the media storm. If anything, intensity had increased overnight as international news outlets picked up the story, and royal correspondents worked through the night to provide analysis and reaction. The gates of Kensington Palace had become a permanent staging ground for television crews from around the world. Catherine woke to the sound of helicopter blades overhead, news helicopters circling at the maximum legal distance. While trying to capture any glimpse of movement within the palace grounds, the children's curtains had been drawn tight the night before, but even so, the constant noise was unsettling. This was their home, but it no longer felt like a sanctuary. The couple's private secretary arrived early with briefing papers that made for sobering reading. Newspaper headlines ranged from supportive to scathing, with some publications calling them brave, while others accused them of abandoning their duty. The editorial pages were filled with passionate arguments on both sides, reflecting a nation genuinely divided about what their decision meant. Public opinion polls conducted overnight showed the country split almost evenly between those who supported the couple's choice and those who felt they had failed in their obligations. The generational divide was particularly stark, with younger people more likely to understand their decision while older generations expressed disappointment and confusion. The children could not go to school that day. The media presence around both Kensington Palace and their schools made normal routines impossible. Instead, their tutors came to them, trying to maintain some educational structure while the world outside their home remained in chaos. George asked his mother why people seemed so angry, and Catherine struggled to find an age-appropriate explanation for the complex emotions their decision had unleashed. King Charles released his own statement that morning, carefully crafted to express both his love for his son and daughter-in-law and his respect for their decision, while also affirming the continuity of the monarchy. "William and Catherine have served with distinction and dedication," the statement read. "While we will miss their contributions as senior working royals, we understand and support their need to prioritize their young family." The statement was notable for what it didn't say as much as for what it did. There was no criticism, no expression of disappointment, and no suggestion that the couple had failed in their duties. Royal watchers understood the significance of this tone, recognizing that the king was choosing family unity over institutional tradition. The ripple effects throughout the royal household were immediate and profound. Staff who had planned their careers around supporting the future king and queen now faced an uncertain future. Some expressed anger and betrayal, feeling that their loyalty and dedication had been dismissed. Others understood and supported the decision, recognizing the toll that royal life had taken on the family they had served. Mrs. Henderson, who had been Catherine's personal assistant for 8 years, was among those who felt most affected. She had watched Catherine struggle with the impossible demands of royal life, had seen her cancel personal commitments to fulfill official duties, and had witnessed the gradual erosion of the vibrant woman she had first met. "I'm heartbroken," she confided to a colleague, "but I also understand. No one should have to live their entire life according to other people's expectations." The financial implications began to become clear as lawyers and accountants worked through the complexities of separating William and Catherine from their royal roles. The couple had insisted on financial independence, but extricating themselves from centuries of intertwined royal financial arrangements proved extraordinarily complex. Their charitable patronages presented another challenge. Catherine had been patron of numerous organizations, many of which had built their programs and fundraising strategies around her involvement. The mental health initiatives she had championed were particularly affected, with several organizations expressing concern about their future without royal patronage. The Center for Early Childhood Development, Catherine's signature project, released a statement expressing their continued commitment to the work while acknowledging the significant impact her departure would have. The Princess of Wales has been instrumental in raising awareness about the critical importance of early childhood development, her statement read. While we will deeply miss her direct involvement, we are committed to continuing the vital work she helped establish. International reaction continued to pour in throughout the day. The President of the United States issued a diplomatic statement, expressing respect for the couple's decision and emphasizing the ongoing strong relationship between the two countries. Other world leaders followed suit, carefully balancing respect for the couple's choice with continued support for the monarchy as an institution, the Commonwealth. Nations faced a particularly complex situation. Many had embraced William and Catherine as representatives of a modernized monarchy that could remain relevant in the contemporary world. Their departure raised questions about the future of these relationships and the monarchy's ability to maintain its relevance across diverse cultures and societies. In Canada, where William and Catherine had conducted successful tours and had been genuinely popular, the Prime Minister expressed disappointment while respecting their choice. "The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have been wonderful ambassadors for the Crown in Canada," his statement read. "We wish them well in their future endeavors and look forward to continued strong ties with the royal family." The couple spent the day in relative isolation within Kensington Palace, emerging only for brief moments to comfort their children and try to maintain some semblance of normal family life. They had prepared for public criticism and media scrutiny, but the intensity of the reaction was overwhelming even for two people who had lived in the public eye for over a decade. Catherine found herself drawn to the window overlooking the gardens, watching the media circus beyond the palace walls with a mixture of fascination and regret. She had always known that leaving royal life would not be simple, but seeing the pain and confusion their decision had caused in so many people was harder than she had anticipated. William struggled with different emotions. As someone who had been groomed for kingship since birth, stepping away from that destiny felt both liberating and terrifying. He had spent his entire life preparing for a role he would now never fulfill, and the identity crisis this created was profound and unsettling. The evening brought unexpected visitors. Prince Edward and Sophie, the Earl and Countess of Wessex, arrived quietly through a private entrance, avoiding the media gathered at the main gates. Their visit was personal rather than official, coming simply as family members who wanted to offer support during an impossibly difficult time. Sophie, who had herself struggled with the transition to royal life in her early years, sat with Catherine in the private sitting room where so many family conversations had taken place. "I remember feeling like I was drowning in the early days," she shared quietly. "The difference is, you've been drowning for over a decade, and you've finally chosen to swim to shore." Edward's conversation with William was more practical, focusing on the immediate challenges they would face and the long-term implications of their decision. "Father is worried," he admitted. "Not about the monarchy, but about you. He's seen what this life can do to people, and he's relieved that you're choosing something different before it destroys you completely." The children had adapted to the unusual circumstances with the resilience that only children possess. Charlotte had turned the media attention outside into a game, pretending she was a princess in a castle surrounded by dragons that her parents were bravely protecting her from. Louis, too young to fully understand the situation, was simply happy to have both parents home for an entire day. George, however, was processing the situation with a maturity that broke his parents' hearts. At dinner, he had asked quietly whether people would still like him when he grew up, given that he probably wouldn't be king anymore. The question revealed a depth of understanding about his changed circumstances that no 8-year-old should have to possess. Late that evening, after the children were asleep and their visitors had departed, William and Catherine sat together in their bedroom and truly absorbed what they had done. The woman who had been Catherine, Princess of Wales, when she woke up that morning, would never hold that title again. The man who had been second in line to the throne since birth had voluntarily removed himself from the succession. They talked until nearly dawn, processing not just the events of the day, but the magnitude of the change they had set in motion. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, and the beginning of a life neither of them could fully imagine. But for the first time in years, they felt like they were facing those challenges as themselves, rather than as the roles they had been expected to play. Catherine fell asleep just as the sun was rising, her head on William's shoulder, both of them exhausted but strangely at peace. Outside, the media crews were already setting up for another day of coverage. But inside their home, the family that had shocked a nation was finally able to rest in the knowledge that they had chosen love over duty, family over institution, and authenticity over expectation. 6 months after the announcement that shocked the world, William and Catherine were living a life that would have been unimaginable during their royal years. The media storm had gradually subsided, though public fascination with their choice remained intense. They had relocated to a private estate in Norfolk, far enough from London to provide genuine privacy, but close enough to maintain important relationships and commitments. The children had adapted remarkably well to their new circumstances. George attended a local village school where he was simply George Wales, not Prince George. His teachers reported that he seemed happier and more relaxed than they had ever seen him, participating freely in playground games and forming friendships without the complicated protocols that had previously surrounded his interactions. Charlotte had blossomed in ways that surprised even her parents. Free from the rigid schedule of royal life, she had discovered a passion for art and spent hours painting in the converted barn that served as her studio. Her work, wild and colorful and completely unrestricted by royal expectations, filled the walls of their new home with joy. Louis, the youngest, had perhaps benefited most from the change. He now had parents who were present for bedtime stories every night, who attended every school play and football match, and who had time for the countless questions and adventures that filled a young child's day. His laughter echoed through their house in a way it never had in the formal corridors of Kensington Palace. Catherine had found unexpected fulfillment in her new role as a private citizen. Without the constraints of royal protocol, she had been able to pursue her passion for early childhood development in ways that had never been possible as a senior royal. She had established a small foundation that worked directly with families in rural communities, providing support and resources without the fanfare and formality that had characterized her previous charitable work. The foundation operated from a small office in the nearby market town, staffed by 3 dedicated professionals who shared Catherine's vision for making a real difference in children's lives. The work was hands-on and immediate, allowing her to see the direct impact of her efforts in ways that had been impossible during her royal years. William had struggled more with the transition, finding it difficult to establish a new identity after a lifetime of preparation for a role he would never fulfill. He had spent months working with a therapist, processing not just the decision to leave royal life, but the complex emotions surrounding his relationship with duty, family, and personal fulfillment. Eventually, he had found his path in environmental conservation, working with a small but influential organization focused on protecting British wildlife habitats. His work took him across the countryside, often involving physical labor that connected him to the land in ways his previous ceremonial duties never had. He had never been happier or more fulfilled professionally. The relationship with the royal family had slowly healed over the months. Following their departure, King Charles visited regularly, finding genuine joy in seeing his son and daughter-in-law at peace in ways they had never been during their royal years. The children's relationship with their grandfather had deepened. Free from the complications of royal hierarchy and expectation, Prince Harry had visited twice from California, and the brothers had found a new understanding based on their shared experience of choosing family over institutional expectation. Their conversations were easier now, freed from the competitive dynamics that had characterized their relationship during their royal years. The public's response had evolved significantly over the months. Initial anger and disappointment had gradually given way to a grudging respect for the courage their decision had required. Opinion polls showed that while many people still disagreed with their choice, most understood the pressures that had led to it. A particularly powerful moment had come when Catherine made her first public appearance since leaving royal life, attending a local village fete to support the school that George now attended. The warm reception she received from ordinary families, free from the formality of royal protocol, had moved her to tears and confirmed that stepping away from royal life had not meant stepping away from meaningful public connection. The couple had learned to navigate their new relationship with the media, which remained interested in their story but had to respect their private citizen status. They occasionally gave interviews to trusted journalists, sharing insights about their experience and their current work, but always on their own terms and in their own time. Their marriage had strengthened in ways that surprised even them. Free from the constant pressure of royal duties and public scrutiny, they had rediscovered the partnership that had drawn them together in the first place. They had time for long conversations, quiet dinners, and the small intimacies that had been crowded out by royal obligations. The financial independence they had insisted upon had proven challenging, but ultimately liberating. William's work with the conservation organization and Catherine's foundation provided modest but sufficient income, supplemented by carefully managed investments. They lived comfortably but simply, in a way that would have been impossible during their royal years. Their home, a Georgian farmhouse set in rolling countryside, had become a sanctuary in ways that their royal residences never could be. The children played freely in the gardens, brought friends home from school, and lived with a spontaneity that had been impossible when every movement required security, clearance, and advanced planning. On quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the house was peaceful, William and Catherine often reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. They had given up titles, wealth, and a destiny that had seemed inevitable, but they had gained something far more precious: the freedom to be themselves, and to raise their children as they chose. The decision had cost them much, but it had also given them everything that truly mattered. They had discovered that love was indeed stronger than duty, that family could triumph over institution, and that sometimes the most courageous choice was simply to choose happiness over expectation. Their story had become a modern fairy tale, but not the traditional kind where the princess lives happily ever after in a palace. Instead, it was a tale about two people who had the courage to write their own ending, who chose love over legacy, and who found that true happiness sometimes required giving up everything the world thought they should want as they looked toward the future. William and Catherine knew that their choice would continue to resonate through history. They had changed not just their own lives, but the conversation about duty, service, personal fulfillment in the modern world. Their goodbye had indeed broken a nation's expectations, but it had also opened the door to new possibilities for what royal life, and indeed any life, could become when guided by love rather than obligation. In choosing themselves and their family, they had given their children the greatest gift of all: the knowledge that their own happiness and authenticity mattered more than any title or tradition. And in the end, that legacy would prove far more valuable than any crown.